Tomb Guard's 1-in-a-million shot. Shut down the snipers. The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his uniform for what he thought would be another routine day, guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier. The crisp October air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic from Washington, D.C., and the measured footsteps of his fellow guards practicing their ceremonial walks. Marcus had been serving as a tomb guard for 3 years, following a distinguished career as a Marine sniper in Afghanistan. At 28, he had seen more combat than most soldiers twice his age, but he found peace in the solemn duty of protecting America's most sacred memorial. The transition from active combat to ceremonial service hadn't been easy, but the honor of guarding the tomb of unknown heroes gave his life new purpose. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood as a powerful symbol of sacrifice, honoring unidentified American service members who had given their lives for their country. The white marble monument, simple yet profound, drew millions of visitors each year. For Marcus and his fellow guards, protecting this sacred space was more than duty. It was a calling that demanded absolute perfection in every movement, every gesture, every moment of vigilance. That morning, Marcus noticed an unusual number of visitors gathering for the changing of the guard ceremony. School groups, veterans, and tourists clustered behind the ropes, their faces filled with reverence and curiosity. Among them, he spotted several men who seemed different from the typical visitors. They stood apart from the crowds, their eyes scanning the area with a professional intensity that Marcus recognized from his military training. His instincts, honed by years of combat experience, began to signal danger. These men moved with the calculated precision of soldiers, but something about their positioning and behavior didn't feel right. They weren't tourists or veterans paying respects, they were studying the area with the kind of focus that suggested hostile intent. Marcus maintained his ceremonial composure while mentally cataloging the suspicious individuals. There were at least 4 of them, positioned at different vantage points around the memorial plaza. They carried backpacks and wore loose clothing that could easily conceal weapons. Most concerning was their obvious interest in the guard positions and the timing of the ceremonies. The changing of the guard was scheduled for 11 o'clock, just 30 minutes away. This ceremony, performed with military precision every hour during the day, always drew the largest crowds. If someone wanted to cause maximum damage and create the greatest psychological impact, this would be the perfect moment to strike. As Marcus continued his measured 21-step walk along the black mat in front of the tomb, his mind raced through possible scenarios. His training as a sniper had taught him to think like his enemies, to anticipate their moves and identify their weaknesses. The suspicious men had positioned themselves with clear sight lines to the tomb and the guard positions, but they had also placed themselves in locations where a skilled marksman could potentially neutralize multiple threats. The weight of his ceremonial rifle felt different now, not just a symbol of honor, but potentially a tool of protection. Though the M14 rifle he carried was typically unloaded during ceremonies, Marcus knew that emergency protocols existed for exactly these kinds of situations. His years of sniper training had made him capable of extraordinary accuracy, even with unfamiliar weapons, and his knowledge of ballistics and trajectory calculations was second nature. 20 minutes before the ceremony, Marcus caught the eye of his relief guard, Corporal James Martinez, who was approaching for the changing ceremony. James had served as an Army Ranger and shared Marcus's background in special operations. Without breaking protocol or alerting the gathering crowd, Marcus used subtle hand signals to communicate his concerns. The beauty of their military training was the ability to communicate danger without creating panic. James immediately understood the situation and began his own assessment of the suspicious individuals. Within moments, he had identified the same threats that Marcus had spotted, confirming that this wasn't paranoia, but a legitimate security concern. The 2 guards had to make a critical decision. They could alert the Arlington National Cemetery Security Force and potentially cause a massive disruption to the ceremony, possibly for nothing more than overly curious visitors. Or they could maintain their positions and prepare to respond if their suspicions proved correct. The weight of protecting not only the sacred tomb but also the hundreds of innocent visitors created an enormous burden of responsibility. Marcus's radio crackled quietly in his earpiece as James discreetly contacted the Security Command Center. The response was immediate. Additional security personnel would be deployed, but they needed to maintain the appearance of normalcy to avoid tipping off potential threats. The ceremony would proceed as scheduled, but everyone involved was now on high alert. As the clock approached 11, the crowd began to grow larger and more tightly packed. Families with children pressed against the barriers, eager for the best view of the solemn ceremony. Veterans stood at attention, their own military bearing evident in their posture and respect. School groups clustered together, their teachers explaining the significance of the moment they were about to witness. Marcus completed his final walk and took his position for the changing of the guard. The familiar routine that he had performed hundreds of times now carried an electric tension that only he and James could feel. Every movement had to be perfect, every step precisely measured, while simultaneously maintaining awareness of potential threats scattered throughout the crowd. The ceremony began with its traditional precision. Marcus and James moved through their choreographed routine, their movements sharp and deliberate. The crowd fell silent, captivated by the solemn beauty of the ritual. But beneath the surface of this peaceful moment, both guards remained coiled and ready, their combat training never far from their consciousness. As they reached the midpoint of the ceremony, Marcus noticed one of the suspicious men reaching into his backpack. The movement was subtle but unmistakably purposeful. In that instant, Marcus realized that his worst fears were about to become reality, and that the one-in-a-million shot that would define his legacy was only moments away. Tomb Guards 1-in-a-million shot. Part 2. The man's hand emerged from his backpack gripping something metallic that glinted in the morning sunlight. Marcus's trained eye immediately recognized the distinctive shape of a rifle scope being assembled with practiced efficiency. This wasn't a casual threat. These were professionals who had planned their attack with military precision. Marcus felt his heart rate slow and his breathing become controlled, a physiological response that had saved his life countless times in Afghanistan. His sniper training was taking over, flooding his system with the calm focus that separated elite marksmen from ordinary soldiers. Time seemed to stretch as he processed multiple variables simultaneously: wind direction, distance to targets, civilian positions, and potential escape routes. The suspicious man was approximately 150 yards away, positioned on a small hill that provided an elevated shooting position overlooking the tomb. Two other men had moved to flanking positions, creating a triangulated field of fire that would make escape nearly impossible for anyone caught in their crosshairs. The fourth man remained near the main crowd, likely serving as a spotter and coordinator for the attack. James continued the ceremonial routine, but Marcus could see the subtle tension in his partner's movements that indicated he too had spotted the developing threat. They had practiced emergency protocols but never imagined they would need to implement them during such a sacred ceremony. The challenge was enormous. They needed to neutralize multiple armed threats while protecting hundreds of innocent civilians, all while maintaining the dignity and reverence that the tomb of the unknown soldier demanded. Marcus quickly calculated angles and distances, his mind automatically compensating for wind speed and bullet drop. His ceremonial M14 rifle was loaded with a single round, as per emergency protocols, but one shot would have to be enough. Missing wasn't an option when so many lives hung in the balance. The lead attacker had finished assembling his weapon and was beginning to acquire his target. Marcus realized with crystal clarity that he had perhaps 30 seconds before the shooting began. The ceremony crowd remained oblivious to the danger, their attention focused on the solemn ritual unfolding before them. Children pointed excitedly at the guards. Veterans stood with hands over hearts, and tourists snapped photographs of what they believed would be a peaceful memory. Marcus made his decision in that instant. Rather than wait for the attackers to fire first, he would take the initiative and attempt to stop the threat before innocent people could be harmed. It was an enormous risk. If he was wrong about the men's intentions, he would face court-martial and disgrace. But his instincts, honed by years of combat experience, told him that hesitation would cost lives. The geometry of the shot was extremely challenging. The primary target was positioned at an angle that required Marcus to fire across the crowd without endangering civilians. The distance was significant enough to require precise calculations for bullet drop and wind drift. Most critically, he would have only one opportunity. After the first shot, the other attackers would either flee or immediately open fire on the crowd. Marcus subtly adjusted his position during the ceremony, using the choreographed movements to align himself for the optimal shot angle. James, recognizing what was happening, began to create subtle diversions that would draw the attention of the other attackers and hopefully delay their response time. The lead attacker raised his rifle and began to sight through his scope. Marcus could see the man's finger moving toward the trigger, and he knew that the moment of action had arrived. In one fluid motion that appeared to be part of the ceremonial routine, Marcus brought his M14 to firing position and acquired his target through the iron sights. The distance was extreme for iron sights, but Marcus had made similar shots in combat conditions. His breathing slowed to an almost meditative rhythm as he found his natural respiratory pause, the brief moment between breaths when the body is most stable. His finger found the trigger and began the slow, steady pressure that would release the shot. The first attacker's rifle was now pointed directly at the crowd of visitors. Marcus could see families with young children directly in the man's line of fire. There was no more time for hesitation or second-guessing. Everything depended on the next few seconds and the accuracy of a single bullet fired under impossible circumstances. Marcus squeezed the trigger with the smooth, deliberate pressure that had been drilled into him through thousands of hours of training. The M14 fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the Memorial Plaza, causing immediate confusion and alarm among the crowd. But Marcus's attention was focused entirely on the target, watching through his sights as the bullet traveled across the distance in what seemed like slow motion. The shot was perfect. The bullet struck the lead attacker center mass, dropping him instantly and sending his rifle clattering across the concrete. The precision of the shot was remarkable. At that distance, with iron sights while maintaining the appearance of ceremonial duties, it represented marksmanship of the highest order. But the other attackers immediately recognized what had happened and began to react. The second gunman, positioned to Marcus's left, raised his weapon and began to acquire targets among the panicking crowd. The third attacker further back was already reaching for his concealed firearm. The fourth man, the coordinator, was shouting commands and trying to organize a response to the unexpected resistance. James had drawn his sidearm and was moving to engage the nearest threat, but the geometry of the situation meant that he couldn't get clear shots without risking civilian casualties. The crowd was beginning to panic, with people running in all directions and creating a chaotic scene that made precise shooting nearly impossible. Marcus realized that his one shot had bought them precious seconds, but the fight was far from over. 3 armed attackers remained, and they were now fully aware that their surprise attack had been compromised. The next few minutes would determine whether his split-second decision to engage would save lives or result in an even greater tragedy. The tomb ceremony had been transformed from a peaceful tribute into a battlefield, and Marcus found himself once again relying on the combat skills that had defined his military career. But this time, the stakes were even higher. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival or that of his fellow soldiers, but for the safety of innocent Americans who had come to honor their nation's heroes. Tomb Guard's 1 in a Million Shot, Part 3. The sound of Marcus's rifle shot shattered the peaceful morning, sending shockwaves through the crowd of visitors who had come to witness a solemn ceremony. Children began crying as their parents grabbed them and looked around frantically for safety. Veterans in the crowd, recognizing the sound of gunfire, immediately began helping to organize an evacuation while trying to identify the source of the threat. The second attacker, positioned about 70 yards to the left of the tomb, had recovered from his initial surprise and was now bringing his rifle to bear on the fleeing civilians. Marcus could see that the man was targeting a group of schoolchildren who were trapped against the memorial barriers, unable to move quickly enough to escape the developing kill zone. With his ceremonial rifle now empty, Marcus had to rely on his sidearm, a standard-issue Beretta M9 pistol. The distance to the second target was at the extreme range for accurate pistol fire, especially under combat conditions with innocent lives in the crossfire. But Marcus had trained extensively with the M9 during his military career, and his natural marksmanship ability gave him confidence even in this desperate situation. James was moving toward the third attacker, using the memorial stone structures for cover, while trying to get close enough for an effective shot with his own sidearm. The challenge was enormous. Both guards needed to neutralize multiple threats simultaneously, while avoiding harm to the hundreds of panicking civilians who were running in every direction. Marcus drew his pistol and immediately began calculating the shot to the second attacker. The man was using a concrete barrier for partial cover, exposing only his upper torso and head as he aimed at the trapped children. The angle was difficult, requiring Marcus to shoot over the heads of fleeing civilians while compensating for the significant bullet drop inherent in long-range pistol fire. The seconds stretched like hours as Marcus found his shooting stance and acquired his target through the pistol's sights. His training had taught him to focus completely on the fundamentals: sight alignment, breathing control, trigger squeeze, and follow through. Everything else, the screaming crowd, the other threats, the weight of responsibility, had to be pushed aside to achieve the precision required for this critical shot. The second attacker was beginning to squeeze his trigger, his rifle pointed directly at a group of elementary school students who were huddled behind their teacher. Marcus could see the terror in the children's faces as they realized they were in danger, but couldn't understand what was happening around them. Marcus fired his pistol, the bullet traveling across the Memorial Plaza in a high arc that just cleared the heads of the running civilians. The shot was remarkable for its precision. At that distance, with a handgun while under extreme stress, hitting a partially concealed target represented marksmanship that bordered on the impossible. The bullet struck the second attacker in the shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to drop his rifle. Though not a fatal hit, it was enough to neutralize the immediate threat to the children and give James the opportunity he needed to close the distance to the third attacker. Meanwhile, Arlington National Cemetery security forces were responding to the emergency calls that had been flooding in since Marcus's first shot. Armed security officers were racing toward the tomb from multiple directions, but they were still several minutes away from arriving at the scene. The guards were essentially on their own for the critical next few minutes. The fourth attacker, the coordinator who had been positioned near the main crowd, was now pulling a concealed pistol and looking for targets of opportunity among the fleeing visitors. His position made him particularly dangerous because he was close enough to the crowd to cause massive casualties with relatively simple shots. Marcus realized that he needed to move from his ceremonial position to engage this new threat effectively. Breaking from the tomb guard post was something that went against every instinct and protocol he had been trained to follow, but the circumstances demanded tactical flexibility over ceremonial tradition. He began moving tactically across the Memorial Plaza, using the monument itself and various stone structures for cover, while keeping his pistol trained on the fourth attacker. The man was beginning to fire into the crowd, and Marcus could hear the distinctive whip-crack sound of bullets passing dangerously close to fleeing civilians. The elderly veteran, probably in his 70s, stumbled and fell directly in the fourth attacker's line of fire. The man was wearing a Vietnam veteran's ball cap and had obviously come to the tomb to pay his respects to fallen comrades. Now he was about to become a casualty himself, unable to get back to his feet quickly enough to reach safety. Marcus didn't hesitate. He broke into a full sprint across the open ground, knowing that he was exposing himself to enemy fire but determined to reach a position where he could protect the fallen veteran. His combat training had taught him that sometimes the most tactically sound decision was also the most personally dangerous. The fourth attacker saw Marcus moving and turned his weapon toward the approaching guard. The two men were now engaged in a deadly race. Could Marcus reach an effective firing position before the attacker could acquire him as a target and squeeze off an accurate shot? Marcus dove behind a small memorial stone just as the attacker's bullet chipped the granite inches from his head. The positioning gave him a clear shot at the fourth man, while also providing protection for the fallen veteran, who was now crawling toward safety behind Marcus's position. The range was much closer now, perhaps 30 yards, well within the effective range of his M9 pistol. Marcus could see the determination in the attacker's eyes as the man repositioned for another shot. This was clearly a professional, someone with military or paramilitary training who understood tactics and wasn't easily intimidated by return fire. Marcus steadied his pistol against the stone memorial and carefully aligned his sights on the center mass of the fourth attacker. His breathing had returned to the controlled rhythm of a trained marksman, and his trigger finger found the familiar pressure point that would release his shot. But just as he was about to fire, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The fourth attacker wasn't alone. There was a fifth man, previously unnoticed, who was now moving into position with what appeared to be an explosive device. The situation had just become exponentially more dangerous, and Marcus realized that even his exceptional marksmanship might not be enough to prevent a catastrophic tragedy. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him as he understood that the next few seconds would determine not just his own fate, but the lives of hundreds of innocent Americans who had simply wanted to honor their nation's fallen heroes on what should have been a peaceful October morning. Tomb Guard's 1 in a Million Shot, Part 4. The fifth attacker moved with the purposeful stride of someone carrying out a predetermined plan. Marcus could see that the device in the man's hands was definitely explosive. The distinctive shape and the careful way he handled it left no doubt about its lethal potential. The positioning suggested that this was meant to be the final devastating blow of their attack, designed to cause maximum casualties among the fleeing crowd. Marcus faced an impossible tactical decision. He had a clear shot at the fourth attacker who was threatening immediate harm to fleeing civilians, but engaging that target would potentially allow the fifth man to detonate his explosive device unchallenged. Alternatively, he could try to engage the bomb carrier first, but that would leave the fourth gunman free to continue shooting into the crowd. Years of combat experience had taught Marcus to prioritize threats based on their potential for causing mass casualties. An explosive device in a crowded area could kill dozens of people, while a single gunman, however dangerous, was limited in the damage he could inflict in a short period. The tactical decision was clear, even though it went against every instinct to protect the immediate threat to the fallen veteran behind him. Marcus swung his pistol toward the fifth attacker, who was now approximately 50 yards away and moving steadily toward the densest concentration of fleeing civilians. The bomb carrier seemed focused on reaching a specific position, probably calculated to maximize the destructive effect of his device. The shot would be extremely challenging, engaging a moving target at medium range with a handgun while under stress from multiple threats. Marcus had practiced similar scenarios during his military training, but never under real-world conditions where failure meant the deaths of innocent civilians. He began tracking the bomb carrier's movement, leading the target to compensate for the man's forward motion. His finger found the trigger as he calculated the precise moment to fire. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. This shot had to be perfect, because there might not be time for a second attempt. Just as Marcus was about to squeeze the trigger, James appeared from behind a memorial stone and engaged the fourth attacker with his own sidearm. The sharp crack of James's pistol provided crucial support, allowing Marcus to focus entirely on the explosive threat without worrying about the immediate danger to the fallen veteran. Marcus fired at the bomb carrier, the bullet traveling across the memorial plaza in what seemed like slow motion. The shot was accurate, striking the fifth attacker in the chest and dropping him immediately. But the explosive device went flying from his hands as he fell, landing dangerously close to a group of tourists who were huddled behind a memorial bench. The device didn't detonate immediately, but Marcus could see that it was still armed and potentially dangerous. The tourists, mostly elderly visitors who had been unable to run quickly enough to escape the violence, were now trapped just yards away from what could be a devastating explosion. Marcus broke from his cover position and sprinted toward the explosive device, driven by the knowledge that every second of delay increased the risk of detonation. His approach was tactically unsound. He was exposing himself to potential fire from any remaining threats, but the lives of the innocent civilians outweighed his personal safety considerations. As he ran, Marcus could hear the distinctive sound of sirens approaching from multiple directions. Arlington National Cemetery security, local police, and federal agents were finally converging on the scene, but they were still precious minutes away from being able to provide meaningful assistance. The explosive device was a crude but effective improvised bomb, probably packed with shrapnel designed to maximize casualties in a crowded area. Marcus's limited explosives training told him that it was likely equipped with a timer or dead man's switch that could trigger detonation at any moment. The two elderly tourists behind the memorial bench were frozen in terror, unable to move quickly enough to escape the potential blast radius. Marcus could see the fear in their eyes as they realized their precarious position, but didn't understand what they needed to do to protect themselves. Marcus reached the device and immediately began examining it for obvious triggering mechanisms. His explosives training from the military had been basic, but thorough enough to give him some understanding of common bomb construction techniques. The device appeared to be on a timer, with approximately 30 seconds remaining before detonation. 30 seconds wasn't enough time to evacuate the elderly tourists to a safe distance, and Marcus realized that his only option was to attempt to disarm the device himself. It was an enormous risk. One wrong move could trigger immediate detonation, but leaving the bomb alone would guarantee civilian casualties. Marcus's hands moved with practiced precision as he located what appeared to be the main triggering mechanism. The construction was relatively simple, designed by someone with basic knowledge but not sophisticated technical skills. That simplicity was both an advantage and a disadvantage, easier to understand but also more likely to have backup triggering systems. 20 seconds remained on the timer as Marcus carefully traced the wiring to identify the primary power source. His combat experience in Afghanistan had included several encounters with improvised explosive devices, and he drew on that knowledge as he worked to neutralize the threat. The elderly tourists behind the bench were watching his every move with a mixture of hope and terror. One woman, probably in her 80s, was softly praying while gripping her husband's hand. A veteran in a Korean war cap was trying to shield the others with his own body, displaying the same courage that had defined his generation's service to their country. 15 seconds remained as Marcus located what he believed to be the main detonation wire. Cutting it would either disarm the device or trigger immediate explosion. There was no way to know which without more sophisticated equipment than he had available. Marcus made his decision based on his assessment of the device's construction and his understanding of common triggering mechanisms. He carefully cut the wire he had identified, holding his breath as he waited to see whether his analysis had been correct. The timer stopped with 7 seconds remaining. The device was disarmed, and the immediate threat to the elderly tourists had been eliminated. But Marcus could hear gunfire in the distance, indicating that James was still engaged with remaining attackers, and that the overall situation was far from resolved. Marcus helped the elderly tourists move to safer positions behind more substantial cover, then turned his attention back to the ongoing firefight. His ammunition was running low, and he needed to assess whether there were additional threats that hadn't yet been identified. The Memorial Plaza looked like a battlefield, with abandoned personal belongings scattered across the ground and evidence of the violent encounter that had transformed a peaceful ceremony into a fight for survival. But the most important thing was that civilian casualties had been minimized through the quick thinking and exceptional marksmanship of 2 guards who had refused to let evil triumph at America's most sacred memorial. Tomb Guards 1 in a Million Shot, Part 5. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder as emergency responders raced toward Arlington National Cemetery from across the Washington, D.C. area. Marcus could see police vehicles, SWAT trucks, and federal agent cars converging on the memorial from multiple directions, their emergency lights flashing against the morning sky. But even with help on the way, the immediate situation remained dangerous and unpredictable. James was still engaged in a firefight with at least one remaining attacker, who had taken cover behind a maintenance building near the edge of the memorial grounds. The sound of gunfire echoed across the cemetery, mixing with the distant wail of sirens to create an atmosphere of controlled chaos that was completely at odds with the usual peaceful dignity of the tomb. Marcus conducted a quick assessment of his remaining ammunition and realized that he was down to his last few rounds. The extended engagement had depleted most of his available firepower, and he needed to make every shot count if additional threats emerged. His training had taught him the importance of ammunition conservation during extended firefights, but the circumstances had demanded rapid engagement of multiple targets. The civilian evacuation was proceeding more smoothly now, with surviving visitors helping each other reach safety behind substantial cover or move toward the arriving emergency vehicles. The elderly tourists that Marcus had saved from the explosive device were being assisted by younger visitors who had stayed behind to help rather than fleeing to safety themselves. Marcus was struck by the courage displayed by ordinary Americans who had chosen to help others rather than saving themselves. A teenage boy was helping an injured woman walk toward the emergency vehicles. A middle-aged businessman had taken off his jacket to use as a tourniquet for someone who had been wounded by shrapnel. A group of veterans were organizing the evacuation with military precision, their old training taking over in the crisis. The first law enforcement officers to reach the scene were Arlington County Police, followed closely by U.S. Park Police, who had jurisdiction over the National Cemetery. The responding officers were professional and well-trained, but they needed briefing on the tactical situation before they could effectively engage the remaining threats. Marcus used his radio to contact the lead officers and provide a rapid situational update. He identified the positions of neutralized threats, the location of James's ongoing engagement, and his assessment of potential additional dangers. The information was crucial for preventing friendly fire incidents and ensuring that the remaining attackers could be cornered and captured without further civilian casualties. Federal agents from multiple agencies were also responding to what was clearly a terrorist attack on a national symbol. FBI counterterrorism specialists, Secret Service agents, and other federal law enforcement personnel were establishing command posts and beginning the complex investigation that would follow any attack on American soil. But Marcus's immediate concern remained tactical. There was still at least one active shooter on the memorial grounds, and until that threat was neutralized, the area remained dangerous for everyone involved. His sniper training had taught him to think systematically about battlefield geometry and threat assessment, skills that were proving invaluable in coordinating with the arriving law enforcement response. James's radio crackled with updates on his engagement with the remaining attacker. The gunman had been wounded but was still armed and dangerous, trapped in a position that provided good cover but limited escape routes. James was maintaining tactical pressure while waiting for backup to arrive and help complete the neutralization. Marcus began moving toward James's position, using the memorial structures for cover while maintaining awareness of potential additional threats. His movement was careful and deliberate, designed to provide support without creating confusion for the arriving law enforcement officers, who might not immediately recognize him as friendly. The tactical situation was complicated by the sacred nature of the location. Every decision had to balance immediate security needs with respect for the memorial and its significance. Stray bullets or explosive devices could damage irreplaceable monuments that honored America's fallen heroes, adding another layer of complexity to an already challenging engagement. As Marcus approached James's position, he could see the remaining attacker more clearly. The man was wounded but still dangerous, armed with a rifle and positioned behind concrete barriers that provided excellent defensive cover. His tactical position suggested military or paramilitary training, and his determination to continue fighting despite his wounds indicated a level of commitment that made him extremely dangerous. Marcus established radio contact with the SWAT team that was moving into position to support the final phase of the engagement. The team leader was an experienced tactical officer who understood the complexities of urban warfare and the special considerations required when operating in a location of national significance. The plan that emerged from their rapid coordination was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus and James would maintain tactical pressure from their current positions, while the SWAT team moved to flank the remaining attacker and cut off his escape routes. The goal was to force surrender if possible, but to be prepared for continued resistance if the gunman chose to fight to the end. Marcus checked his remaining ammunition one final time and prepared for what he hoped would be the last phase of this deadly encounter. His marksmanship had already proven decisive in preventing what could have been a catastrophic terrorist attack. But the job wasn't finished until every threat was neutralized and the memorial grounds were secure. The weight of responsibility that had driven Marcus throughout this crisis remained heavy on his shoulders. He had volunteered for tomb guard duty as a way of honoring America's unknown heroes, never imagining that he would need to use his combat skills to protect the memorial itself from attack. But as he prepared for the final engagement, Marcus felt a sense of profound purpose. His 1-in-a-million shot had started a chain of events that had prevented mass casualties and protected one of America's most sacred sites. Now he needed to help finish what he had started, ensuring that those who would attack American symbols and innocent civilians would face the consequences of their actions. The Memorial Plaza was no longer the peaceful place of reflection. It had been just an hour earlier, but it remained undefeated. The tomb itself stood unmarked and intact, continuing its eternal vigil over America's unknown heroes, protected by guards who had proven themselves worthy of the trust placed in them. Tomb Guards 1 in a Million Shot, Part 6. The SWAT team moved with the fluid precision of highly trained professionals, their tactical approach demonstrating years of experience in high-stakes urban operations. Marcus watched as they established positions that would allow them to engage the final attacker from multiple angles while minimizing the risk of crossfire that could endanger the tomb, guards, or any remaining civilians in the area. The team leader, a veteran sergeant named Rodriguez, had quickly grasped the tactical situation and developed a plan that played to each participant's strengths. Marcus's sniper background made him ideal for providing precision overwatch, while James's position allowed him to maintain direct pressure on the gunman's defensive position. Communication between all the tactical elements was critical, and Marcus found himself serving as a liaison between the Tomb Guards and the SWAT team. His military background and understanding of tactical operations made him uniquely qualified to help coordinate the complex engagement that was about to unfold. The remaining attacker had been identified as the apparent leader of the terrorist cell, a man whose military bearing and tactical knowledge suggested extensive training and combat experience. His willingness to continue fighting despite being wounded and outnumbered indicated a level of fanaticism that made negotiation unlikely and surrender even less probable. Marcus could see that the gunman was preparing for a final stand, repositioning his weapon and checking his ammunition in the methodical way of someone who understood that his situation was becoming increasingly desperate. The man's tactical position was strong defensively but offered no real escape route, creating a situation where he would likely fight until killed or incapacitated. The psychological pressure of the situation was intense for everyone involved. SWAT team members were trained for these scenarios, but the location added an emotional weight that affected everyone present. They weren't just neutralizing a criminal threat. They were protecting a sacred memorial that represented the sacrifice of countless American heroes. Marcus felt the familiar calm that had served him so well during combat operations in Afghanistan. His breathing slowed and his vision narrowed to focus entirely on the tactical problem before him. Years of training had prepared him for exactly this kind of high-pressure situation where split-second decisions and precise execution would determine success or failure. The final phase of the engagement began when the SWAT team initiated their flanking movement. Marcus could see the tactical elements moving into position with professional efficiency, their approach designed to overwhelm the gunman's ability to respond to threats from multiple directions simultaneously. The remaining attacker recognized what was happening and began firing rapidly at the approaching SWAT officers, his accuracy degraded by his wounds and the stress of being surrounded, but still dangerous enough to pose a serious threat. The gunfire echoed across the memorial grounds, mixing Tomb Guards 1 in a Million Shot. Part 7. In the hours that followed the neutralization of the terrorist threat, Arlington National Cemetery transformed into a massive crime scene investigation. Federal agents from multiple agencies worked methodically to piece together every detail of the attack, from the planning stages through the final confrontation. The scope of the investigation extended far beyond the memorial grounds as authorities sought to determine whether the terrorist cell had additional members or planned further attacks. Marcus and James found themselves at the center of an extensive debriefing process that would continue for days. FBI counterterrorism specialists, military intelligence officers, and homeland security analysts all needed detailed accounts of the guards' observations and actions. The information they provided would be crucial for understanding the attacker's capabilities and preventing similar threats in the future. The investigation revealed that the terrorist cell had been planning their attack for months, conducting surveillance of the tomb and studying the routines of the guards and the patterns of visitor traffic. Their goal had been to maximize casualties while striking at a symbol that represented American military sacrifice and national unity. The attackers had been well-funded and professionally trained, with backgrounds that suggested international terrorist connections. Their weapons and explosives were sophisticated, and their tactical approach demonstrated military-level planning and preparation. Without the exceptional skills and quick thinking of Marcus and James, the attack could have resulted in hundreds of casualties and significant damage to the memorial itself. The media coverage of the incident was extensive, with news outlets around the world reporting on the terrorist attack that had been thwarted by two tomb guards. Marcus found himself uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to focus on his duties rather than the growing public recognition of his actions. The story that emerged in the media focused particularly on Marcus's remarkable marksmanship under extreme pressure. Military experts interviewed by news organizations described his shots as representing some of the finest combat marksmanship ever documented, particularly given the challenging conditions and the stakes involved. The 1 in a million shot that had started the engagement became a symbol of American military excellence and the dedication of those who serve as guardians of the nation's most sacred memorials. Military academies began studying the incident as an example of how training, preparation, and individual courage could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Marcus received numerous commendations and awards for his actions, including recognition from the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. But perhaps more meaningful to him were the letters and messages from ordinary Americans who expressed their gratitude for his protection of the tomb and the lives he had saved. The families of the visitors who had been present during the attack reached out to thank Marcus and James personally. The elderly tourists who had been saved from the explosive device became particularly close to Marcus, treating him like a beloved grandson and maintaining regular contact long after the incident. The psychological impact of the attack affected everyone involved, including Marcus and James. Both guards received counseling and support to help them process the trauma of the experience and the weight of the decisions they had been forced to make. The transition from ceremonial duties to life-and-death combat had been jarring, requiring professional assistance to work through the emotional aftermath. The tomb itself required only minor repairs to damage caused by stray bullets during the firefight. The memorial's essential structure and symbolism remained intact, allowing it to continue serving its sacred purpose of honoring America's unknown heroes. The attack had failed in its fundamental goal of damaging this powerful symbol of national sacrifice, and remembrance-enhanced security measures were implemented at Arlington National Cemetery and other national memorials following the attack. The incident had revealed vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed while maintaining the open and accessible character that made these sites meaningful to visitors from around the world. Marcus eventually returned to his duties as a tomb guard, though his experience had changed him profoundly. The weight of responsibility that came with protecting such a sacred site felt even heavier after having faced an actual threat to its safety and the lives of innocent visitors. The Tomb Guard unit developed new training protocols based on the lessons learned from the attack. Marcus and James played key roles in developing scenarios that would prepare future guards for similar threats while maintaining the ceremonial excellence that defined their service. Years later, Marcus would often reflect on the morning when his 1 in a million shot had changed everything. The incident had demonstrated that even in peacetime service, military personnel might be called upon to use their combat skills to protect innocent lives and national symbols. The tomb of the unknown soldier continued its eternal vigil, guarded by sentries who understood more deeply than ever the importance of their mission. The attack had been intended to strike at the heart of American military tradition and national memory, but instead, it had revealed the courage and skill of those entrusted with protecting these sacred spaces. Marcus's legacy became intertwined with the tomb itself, a reminder that the guardians of America's memorials stand ready to defend them with the same dedication and skill that characterize the unknown soldiers they honor. His 1 in a million shot had not only saved lives, but had also preserved the sanctity of a place where Americans come to remember and honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. The story became part of the oral tradition passed down among tomb guards, inspiring future generations to maintain the highest standards of excellence and readiness. Marcus had proven that the ceremony and tradition of the tomb guard were not merely symbolic but represented a living commitment to protect and honor America's military heritage against any threat that might emerge. In the end, the attack that was meant to destroy had instead strengthened the bonds between the American people and their military, demonstrating that the values represented by the tomb of the unknown soldier, courage, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication, remained as powerful and relevant as ever in protecting the nation and its most cherished symbols.